Imagine facing an army that moves like water, strikes like lightning, and leaves no enemy standing in its wake. A force so disciplined, so cunning, that entire kingdoms trembled at the sound of one name: Alexander. But what made him unstoppable wasn't sheer numbers, nor divine ancestry, nor even his legendary courage. It was something far more terrifying: strategy. A strategy so precise, so adaptable, that no general, no army, no fortress could ever anticipate it. From the plains of Greece to the deserts of Persia, Alexander's campaigns redefined warfare. He didn't just conquer, he rewrote the rules of the battlefield. And every move he made, every formation he deployed, every feint he executed had a purpose. His enemies weren't merely defeated, they were outsmarted, entrapped, and broken before the first swords swung. In this video, we're diving deep into the mind of Alexander the Great. We'll uncover the secrets behind his military genius, the strategies that made him unstoppable, and the battles that proved no enemy could resist his tactics. You'll see how he turned weaknesses into weapons, terrain into allies, and ordinary soldiers into a force that history still marvels at today. We'll start at the beginning. How a young Macedonian prince, barely in his 20s, faced formidable armies and emerged victorious. Then we'll follow the evolution of his strategies, from clever maneuvers in Greece to the decisive crushing blows in Persia and beyond. Every battle has a lesson. Every maneuver reveals genius. And by the end, you'll understand why Alexander's methods continue to be studied, not just by historians, but by modern strategists worldwide. So get ready, because what you're about to witness is not just history, but a masterclass in strategy, audacity, and brilliance. And it all begins with the single daring move that changed the fate of an empire. Let's dive and see how Alexander set the stage for the unstoppable force he would become.
Before Alexander became a legend, he was just a boy learning how to conquer the world. Born in 356 BCE in Pella, Macedonia, Alexander was the son of King Philip II. But being royalty didn't automatically grant him battlefield genius. It had to be earned. From a young age, he was trained in philosophy, science, and war. Aristotle himself tutored him, shaping his mind to think critically, strategically, and creatively. By the time he was 16, Alexander was already commanding troops. At just 18, he proved himself in battle, leading a cavalry unit to crush a rebellious city. He learned not only the power of brute force, but the importance of terrain, timing, and morale. Every victory, small as it seemed, taught him a lesson. An army is more than soldiers. It's a living organism, and the general must move it like a master conductor. Philip's campaigns exposed young Alexander to a variety of enemies and terrains, from the mountains of Greece to the plains of Thrace. He studied each confrontation, noting what worked, what failed, and how an unexpected maneuver could turn defeat into victory. But even with all this preparation, he had one major challenge: Philip himself. The young prince had to step out of his father's shadow and forge his own legacy. This tension between learning from the master and outgrowing him would shape Alexander's mindset: bold, fearless, and willing to take risks others never would. And then, in 336 BCE, everything changed. Philip was assassinated, and Alexander inherited a kingdom and an army. But stepping into his father's shadow was only the first challenge. What he would do next would shock friend and foe alike. Alexander didn't wait for enemies to come to him. He struck first and with precision. Ascending the throne at just 20, Alexander faced revolts in Macedonia and rebellion across the Greek city-states. Many saw him as inexperienced, a boy king not ready for real leadership. But Alexander moved swiftly, using a combination of diplomacy and force. He crushed revolts quickly, using both speed and surprise. At Thebes, he demonstrated his strategic ruthlessness. Rather than a drawn-out siege, he struck decisively, showing the Greeks that resistance was futile. His actions weren't merely punishment, they were calculated lessons for future adversaries. Alexander also reorganized his army, integrating lessons from Philip's reforms with his own innovations. He emphasized flexibility, speed, and coordination. The Macedonian phalanx, combined with elite cavalry, became a weapon that could adapt to almost any battlefield. And he made sure his men trusted him completely, leading from the front, sharing risks, and inspiring loyalty. By the time he set his eyes eastward toward Persia, Alexander had not just secured his home, he had proven his brilliance. Every step, every decision, every battle reinforced a pattern. He analyzed, adapted, and executed flawlessly. But the Persian Empire was vast, wealthy, and powerful. And when Alexander crossed the Hellespont, he faced a challenge that would test every lesson he had ever learned, and force him to invent strategies no enemy could foresee.
Crossing into Asia Minor, Alexander faced the enormous Persian Empire. His first battles were tests, both of his army and of his own strategic instincts. At the Battle of Granicus, he faced a river crossing against a numerically superior force. Most generals would have hesitated. Alexander charged. Leading from the front, he used speed and surprise, outflanking the Persians and turning terrain into advantage. Cavalry struck like lightning, the phalanx held firm, and the enemy crumbled before their formations could respond. This battle was more than a win, it was a template. Alexander learned how to integrate intelligence, terrain, and timing to crush larger armies. Psychological warfare also played a key role. Every victory amplified his legend, making enemies hesitate before engaging him. The river at Granicus was just the beginning. Beyond it lay armies that outnumbered his own, and terrain that could either destroy him or become his secret weapon. After Granicus, Alexander advanced along the coast toward Halicarnassus. The city was heavily fortified, defended by Persian satraps and Greek mercenaries. A direct assault would be costly, too costly. Alexander needed a strategy that minimized losses while maximizing impact. He studied the terrain carefully. Hills overlooked the city, marshes protected its flanks. Alexander divided his army, sending feints to distract the defenders while engineers prepared siege towers and battering rams. Each move was choreographed. Soldiers attacked from multiple directions, creating confusion. At night, Alexander personally led raids against Persian outposts, capturing supply lines and weakening morale. The defenders grew paranoid, unsure where the next strike would come. Psychological pressure combined with tactical brilliance forced the city's leaders to abandon key positions. After weeks of pressure, the city fell. Alexander avoided a prolonged siege, preserving his forces for the battles ahead. Victory came with minimal Macedonian losses, proving his strategy, intelligence, preparation, and adaptive tactics could defeat even the strongest fortifications. The city had fallen, but the Persian king had not yet revealed his true strength. Alexander would soon face a battle that demanded more than bravery. It demanded genius. Face to face with Darius III, Alexander would test whether his strategies could defeat the empire itself. The Persian king marshaled a massive army, vastly outnumbering Alexander's forces. The stage was narrow, a valley between mountains and the sea. Perfect for channeling the enemy, but dangerous if misjudged. Alexander placed his phalanx at the center, his elite companion cavalry on the right. He feigned weakness in one sector, luring Persian forces to commit prematurely.
Then, at the precise moment, he led a cavalry charge directly at Darius, splitting the Persian center. The psychological impact was devastating. Persian troops panicked, seeing their king in danger. Alexander exploited this chaos, ordering flanking maneuvers that crushed enemy morale. By the end of the day, Darius fled, leaving his army leaderless. Alexander's forces had won decisively, despite being outnumbered. The lesson was clear. Strategy isn't just about numbers. It's about timing, deception, and striking where the enemy is weakest. Darius had fled, but victory came with danger. Alexander's next move would determine whether Persia could ever recover, or whether the empire itself would unravel. Tyre, a fortified island city, blocked Alexander's advance to Egypt. Conventional tactics wouldn't work. There was no land approach, and the defenders had the sea on their side. Alexander ordered the construction of a massive causeway to reach the city walls. Towers, siege engines, and catapults moved forward on this artificial land bridge, a feat of engineering as much as strategy. Naval battles raged alongside the siege. Tyrians launched attacks from the sea, but Alexander adapted, building a fleet from captured ships. Weeks of relentless pressure broke the defenders' morale. Eventually, Alexander breached the walls. Tyre fell, sending a clear message. No city, no matter how fortified, could resist his combination of ingenuity and relentless determination. Tyre was taken, but the eastern Mediterranean was vast, and not every enemy could be crushed with walls alone. The next campaign would test both strategy and endurance like never before.
Upon entering Egypt, Alexander was welcomed as a liberator, but he used this opportunity strategically, consolidating power and securing supply lines before the Persian heartland. He visited the Oracle of Ammon at Siwa, using the encounter to cement his authority both politically and psychologically. By presenting himself as divinely sanctioned, he inspired loyalty among troops and subjects alike. Alexander also reorganized Egypt's cities and ports, strengthening the logistical backbone that would support campaigns deep into Persian territory. This strategic foresight, combining military brilliance with psychological influence, ensured that Alexander wasn't just conquering land, he was creating an unshakable base for future campaigns. But the Persian king was regrouping. And soon, Alexander would face his greatest test yet at Gaugamela. Darius assembled perhaps the largest army the ancient world had ever seen. Chariots, cavalry, and infantry stretched across the plains. Most generals would hesitate, but Alexander thrived on audacity. He studied the terrain, deployed his phalanx to hold the center, and used flexible cavalry wings to exploit gaps. Darius expected a frontal engagement, but Alexander feigned retreat in some sectors, drawing Persian troops into traps. At the critical moment, Alexander personally led the Pompeian cavalry in a decisive strike at Darius himself. The psychological shock of seeing their king endangered caused Persian troops to collapse from within. By the end of the battle, Persia's army was shattered and Darius fled once again. The battle demonstrated the pinnacle of Alexander's strategic genius, integrating mobility, deception, terrain, and leadership to overwhelm even the mightiest armies.
But Alexander didn't wait for Darius to regroup. He chased him relentlessly, turning pursuit into strategy. Every delay allowed Persia to rebuild. Alexander understood that speed and psychological pressure were weapons themselves. His army moved faster than any expected, crossing deserts and rivers, striking supply depots, and capturing key cities. Alexander's strategy combined battlefield tactics with operational mobility, forcing Darius to fight under stress, fatigue, and fear. Eventually, Darius was cornered, only to be betrayed by his own generals. Alexander captured vast territories without massive battles, demonstrating that strategy could replace brute force when executed with precision. But the war wasn't over.
The eastern campaigns would test Alexander's adaptability like never before. Pushing into India, Alexander faced unfamiliar terrain, massive elephants, and armies unlike anything he had previously encountered. He modified formations, used terrain cleverly, and experimented with new tactics against war elephants. At the Battle of Hydaspes, Alexander feigned a river crossing, lured the enemy into a trap, and struck decisively. The Indian campaign showed his ability to innovate mid-battle, turning unfamiliar challenges into opportunities for victory. It wasn't brute force, it was strategy, observation, and adaptability. Even as he conquered, Alexander faced one of history's most persistent challenges: keeping a vast, exhausted army loyal. His army, after years of relentless campaigns, grew weary. Mutinies and dissent threatened the cohesion of his forces. Alexander's challenge shifted from defeating enemies to maintaining unity and morale. He used a combination of charisma, rewards, and symbolic gestures to inspire loyalty. He held councils, led personally, and shared in hardship. His strategy evolved, now including psychology and leadership as tools of conquest. The lesson was stark. Strategy alone cannot sustain campaigns. Human factors, endurance, and trust are just as critical as battlefield maneuvers. Yet, despite fatigue and limits, Alexander pressed on, chasing legacy beyond mere victory.
From Macedonia to India, he demonstrated principles that still influence military thought today: adaptability, speed, deception, psychological warfare, and combined arms. Every engagement, from the Granicus to the Hydaspes, reinforced a pattern: study your enemy, manipulate the terrain, exploit timing, and strike decisively. His genius was not invincibility, but understanding how to make the odds favor him consistently. By conquering vast territories, inspiring loyalty, and creating a legacy that endured long after his death, Alexander proved that strategy can surpass numbers, geography, and even fate. And that legacy, the strategy no enemy could resist, still shapes how the world thinks about leadership, warfare, and ambition. Alexander the Great wasn't merely a conqueror, he was a strategist, a thinker, and a visionary who turned bold ideas into unstoppable action. He showed that intelligence, preparation, and adaptability could defeat armies far larger and better equipped. His legacy stretches beyond battlefields. It's in the way generals study terrain and timing, how leaders motivate troops, and how planners integrate strategy with psychology. Every movement, every feint, every decisive strike teaches the same lesson. Victory belongs not to the strongest, but to the most cunning, disciplined, and adaptive. History remembers him not only for the lands he conquered, but for the strategies he perfected. From the plains of Macedonia to the rivers of India, his campaigns remain blueprints for understanding power, risk, and innovation. Alexander's story reminds us that genius is not in brute force, it is in thinking, seeing, and acting where others cannot. And it is a story that continues to inspire all who dare to lead. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Alexander's unstoppable strategies and want more cinematic storytelling that uncovers the tactics, genius, and secrets behind history's greatest leaders, subscribe, like, and comment on which historical legend you want us to explore next. Your support keeps these epic stories alive and brings history's greatest moments back to life.